How does a boy who seemed to have it all, national TV childhood, chart-topping hits, and a dream wedding to Hollywood royalty, wind up in a relationship so toxic? His wife pleaded, "If I don't get help, we're both going to die." For decades, Ricky Nelson grinned through the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, selling the world a squeaky clean fantasy. Behind the cameras, Kristen, or Kris Harmon, was living a very different script. A rushed shotgun ceremony, spiraling all-night parties, a closet emptied in revenge, while her husband toured, an alleged cheerleader trap, a ruinous divorce, a secret love child, the New Year's Eve 1985 fireball that spawned white powder rumors, and a custody showdown that turned brother against sister. The fairy tale America believed was just Act 1. The real drama leaked from rehab logs, court filings, and one widow who finally stopped protecting the myth. Those files are open, and we're about to pry them wide. Think you know Ricky Nelson? After you hear what his wife revealed, every rerun will feel like a lie. America's favorite TV family, and the girl who fell in. Before she married Ricky, Kris Harmon wasn't just dating a celebrity. She was orbiting two dynasties. On one side, her own family. Her father, Tom Harmon, was a Heisman Trophy legend turned broadcaster. Her mother, Elise Knox, a film actress. On the other, the Nelsons, band leader Ozzie, singer Harriet, and their sons, David and Ricky. The first family to turn their real household into serialized entertainment across radio and television. Kris met the Nelson boys young. She later said she fell in love with the family first. The warmth, the attention, the sense that the adults actually listened. Imagine being a teenage girl invited behind the set wall of America's favorite household and finding out the family was exactly as charming off camera. Or so it seemed. What started as visits became dates. By the time Kris was 16, she and 21-year-old Ricky were a thing. Hollywood took notice. For fans, it was the ultimate crossover. The Harmon glam gene pool meets the Nelson TV empire. A studio-friendly dream. And then, very fast, it stopped being theoretical. Something else was on the way, but not the televised engagement special. That wedding wasn't just dreamy, it was on a clock. Chapter 1. Shotgun Wedding Under Studio Lighting. April 20th, 1963. Catholic Church. Flashbulbs, magazine spreads, screaming teenage fans outside. Ricky Nelson, pop idol, Kris Harmon, 18 and radiant. 6 months later, their first child, Tracy, arrived. Official story, early baby. Family translation, shotgun wedding. Ricky would later laugh about it, but at the time, both clans did their best to keep the timeline polite. Image mattered. The Nelson show was still running. Advertisers liked clean math, so the myth held. TV's favorite son marries an all-American beauty, and a sweet baby follows. Fans swooned. But starting a marriage under fast-tracked pressure, age gap, pregnancy, non-stop publicity, loads the emotional deck. The young couple barely had time to learn each other as adults. Kris went from teenager to wife to new mother almost overnight, and the pace wouldn't slow. Fame doesn't wait for nap time. Ricky's touring calendar was just getting started. Chapter 2. Young parents, heavy spotlight, no brake pedal. Through the mid-1960s, their family grew as fast as his discography. Ricky was still charting hits. Poor Little Fool, Travelin' Man, Hello, Mary Lou. Even as the British invasion changed the marketplace, he worked to prove he wasn't a disposable teen crush. Studio sessions, TV spots, road dates. Meanwhile, Kris was having babies, the twins, Gunnar and Matthew, in 1967. Years later, baby Sam. She painted seriously and sold canvases. She also carried the emotional load at home while her husband lived on the bus, in arenas, in hotel bars. Here's the friction point. To stay relevant musically, Ricky had to leave. To feel secure emotionally, Kris needed him home. Multiply that by youth, money, and access, and the usual new parent exhaustion tips into something louder. Still, no one in the public saw trouble. The Nelsons smiled in photo features. Kris guest appeared on Ozzie and Harriet as Ricky's on-screen bride, turning their real marriage into TV meta before reality was a genre. Fans thought they were watching the dream. They weren't watching the coping mechanisms. Next came the era Kris would later describe in one blunt sentence. We were hippie rock and rollers. Chapter 3. We were hippie rock and rollers. When Kris finally told the truth years later, she didn't sweeten it. Her summary of the 1970s, we were hippie rock and rollers. We did what everyone else was doing. Translation, late nights, pills to get up, something else to come down, drinking as social glue. She tried to keep up with her husband's road life, jumping on tour, hanging backstage, rolling with the band, believing that being one of the guys would hold the marriage together. Instead, she says, it dragged her deeper into the same chemical fog, swallowing him. After a while, we were totally messed up, both of us, she admitted. This is where the glossy press shots hide the cost. The Nelson name still implied clean mid-century values. The actual couple was now living the post-Woodstock musician lifestyle, loud, loose, and fueled. Privately, both entered therapy. She showed up. He started skipping sessions. The pattern hardened. Cycles of partying, remorse, promises, repeat. Kris later said she tried to raise the alarm outside the marriage. She went to family. There's a drug problem here. We all have to help. She says the response was denial. Nobody wanted to stain the brand. That silence bought time, but at a high interest rate. Addiction keeps score. And jealousy on top of it? Things were about to detonate. Chapter 4. Jealousy, distance, and a closet emptied while he was gone. By the mid-1970s, resentment was constant. He left for gigs. She stewed at home. Each suspected the other of crossing lines. Money stress piled on, touring costs, staff, big properties. At one breaking point in 1977, while Ricky was out performing, Kris reportedly had his belongings moved out of the family house and into a rental. Symbolic? Totally. It said, we're done living the illusion. When Ricky got back, things detonated. Within weeks came the incident fans whispered about for years. Kris showed up at that rental and found him with 2 professional cheerleaders, Los Angeles Rams squad, partying. Was he cheating? Was it a trap? Ricky later claimed she set him up, that she arranged for the women to be there so she could catch him and nuke him in divorce court. She insisted she walked into proof of what life on the road had already become. Either version ends the same way. Trust gone, marriage on fumes. Still, the story didn't hit the fan magazines in full. Not yet. The real explosion came when lawyers got involved, and every private accusation went public. Chapter 5. The nasty divorce. Drugs, money, parenting bombs. Kris filed for divorce in late 1977. She asked for support, custody, and her half of everything earned during the marriage. Then, classic toxic dance, they reconciled briefly, bought a new house, tried again. It didn't stick. In 1980, she filed again, and this time, the split stuck. What followed was one of the ugliest Hollywood divorces of its era. Court filings bristled with accusations. Heavy drinking, drugs, unstable moods, unfit parenting. Thrown both ways. Each side argued the kids weren't safe with the other. He said she was out of control. She said he was chemically unreliable and absent. Money added gasoline. Decades of earnings had been spent, reinvested, or mismanaged. Legal fees chewed through what was left. By the time the divorce finalized in 1982, more than $1 million had vaporized in professional costs, and Ricky's finances were wrecked. On paper, Kris got custody and support. In practice, her addictions were still raging. The children's living arrangements became musical chairs. Eldest Tracy spent stretches with her dad, the twins bounced. Young Sam at times lived with relatives because his mother was in no shape to parent full-time. The storybook marriage had become a case file, and just when the dust started to settle, a secret surfaced outside the marriage that fans never saw coming. Chapter 6. The child no one put in the family photos. While his marriage was in slow collapse, Ricky had a brief relationship with a young woman named Georgianne Crew. She became pregnant. On February 14th, 1981, she delivered a son, Eric. At first, insiders say there was resistance to acknowledging the baby. Some advised she move on, others insisted she press. She did. One account says she literally brought the infant to a Ricky Nelson show and sat where he couldn't miss them. Legal action followed. Court-ordered testing confirmed paternity, and Ricky began paying support. Why does this matter to your video? Because it shatters the TV myth in a single blow. While magazines ran staged Nelson family Christmas spreads, a child outside the marriage existed in the real timeline. Fans who thought they knew Ricky didn't know this chapter. Nor, for a while, did the broader public. But the paperwork existed, and Kris absolutely knew. Another emotional grenade inside an already scorched marriage. And Ricky's personal life wasn't the only front under pressure. His career battle to stay relevant fed the stress at home. Chapter 7. Reinventing Ricky. From teen idol to garden party. Quick context helps. Ricky Nelson wasn't just sliding downhill. He was working hard to stay musically relevant. He leaned on rockabilly roots, then pushed into country rock long before the trend hit big, hiring young hotshot guitarist James Burton and evolving his sound. In 1972, he released Garden Party, triggered by a nostalgia concert where older fans booed him for playing new material. The lyric punchline, "You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself," was more than a hook. It was a lifeline. But self-reinvention rarely pays fast. Mid-level venues, constant travel, uneven money, wearing. Being away wore his marriage down. Every road mile added emotional distance at home. Every financial dip raised the stakes in court. So when you hear Kris say she urged him to change his life, slow down touring, get help, you can hear the exhaustion behind it. She was trying to steer a guy still hustling to matter in a market that had moved on. He kept flying, and one of those flights ended everything. Chapter 8. New Year's Eve. Fire in the Sky. December 31st, 1985. Ricky, his fiancée Helen Blair, and bandmates boarded a vintage DC-3, headed to a New Year's gig in Dallas, somewhere over Texas. Smoke. Heat. The cabin filled. Pilots aimed for an emergency landing in a field near DeKalb. The cockpit survived. The passenger cabin didn't. Ricky, Helen, and 5 others died of smoke and fire before they could escape. He was 45. Shock rippled across the country. For millions, Ricky was still the kid from TV. For Kris's children, he was dad. Gone in seconds. For Kris herself, it was a gut punch, layered on addiction, divorce debt, and unresolved grief. Then came the headlines. Within days, tabloids pushed a wild claim that some kind of white powder ignition inside the plane started the blaze, an implied drug angle that stuck in public memory. Investigators later focused on a faulty cabin heater as the likely source. No proof ever backed the rumor, but reputations don't wait for final reports. Kris watched her ex-husband die twice, once in the crash, once in the gossip. And while smoke still hung over the wreckage, she made a legal move that shocked the Nelsons. Chapter 9. The estate fight. Nobody saw coming. Though divorced since 1982, Kris moved quickly after the crash. With 4 minor children, she petitioned the court, claiming Ricky died without a valid will, and sought to administer his estate and gain access to life insurance money that might help secure the kids' future. From her perspective, she was their mother. The kids needed stability. Ricky's finances were chaotic. From the Nelson side, not so fast. Ricky's brother David stepped forward with a will naming him executor and placing the estate in trust for the children. The court sided with the document. Kris's bid was rejected. David took control. This episode reframed Kris in public. To some fans, she suddenly looked like an opportunist grabbing at her ex's assets. To others, she was a cash-strapped mother trying to salvage something for her kids from a wrecked financial landscape. Either way, the once perfect daughter-in-law was now an open legal conflict with the brand she'd married into. That tension never fully healed, but it was about to be overshadowed by something even more personal. As Kris fought to stay sober and prove she could parent, someone very close challenged her right to do it. Chapter 10. Rehab, then ambush. After years of using, Kris finally let herself be talked into treatment. The voice that got through belonged to her younger brother, actor Mark Harmon. She trusted him. According to Kris, he told her flat out, "You need real help. Let professionals handle this." She entered rehab, and by her account, completed the program successfully. She walked out proud, clean, ready to reset with her kids, and walked straight into a subpoena. Mark and his wife, Pam Dauber, had filed for custody of 12-year-old Sam. Kris has said she literally had hours to find a lawyer. She thought it had to be some cruel joke. It wasn't. Mark argued that given Kris's long history of dependency, Sam needed stability elsewhere. A psychiatrist cited statements from the boy that life with Mom could be scary, that her mood swings were like facing a dragon. The court initially granted Mark temporary custody and ordered Kris to stay clear of his home. Family eruptions are bad. Famous family eruptions are public. The press had a feeding frenzy. Golden boy Mark Harmon versus troubled rock widow. Kris fought back hard, and she didn't fight clean. Because when blood relatives go to war, old secrets start flying. Chapter 11. Mud, Blood, and a Deal. Desperate to keep Sam, Kris counterattacked in the press and in court. In one explosive claim, she suggested Pam Dauber had her own white powder problem, an accusation that landed like a grenade. Whether tactic, truth, or lashing out, it escalated everything. The custody hearing became a spectacle. Addiction histories, parenting failures, competing portraits of what's best for the child. Sam, just a kid, was wedged in the middle while cameras camped outside. Then, after weeks of escalation, Mark blinked. Accounts from those involved say he approached Kris's side and said something close to, "We don't want to go further. Too much blood's been spilled." The matter settled. Kris retained physical custody. Mark received visitation and oversight access, effectively a safety valve, so he could check in and stay involved. All parties agreed to family therapy. The formal custody petition was withdrawn. The fight nearly destroyed sibling ties, but it also forced everyone to confront what hadn't been faced for years. Addiction had gutted the family, and ignoring it didn't work. So did any of this heal? That depends which child you ask, but their later words tell you a lot. Chapter 12. The kids grow up and talk back. As the Nelson children aged out of court orders, they shared slivers of their experiences. Never identical, always colored by which parent they leaned toward. Actress Tracy has spoken with compassion about both, remembering the chaos, but also the love. Twins Gunnar and Matthew, who later formed the band Nelson, and scored a 1990 hit with Can't Live Without Your Love and Affection, have been frank that their mother struggled, drank, and could be emotionally unreliable. They also credit their dad's musical legacy for giving them a path. Youngest son Sam, who once figured in psychiatric testimony against Kris, surprised many years later by saying the anger faded. As an adult, he said that what seemed huge as a kid just stopped mattering. "We're in a good place," he said, of his relationship with his mom. That's not revisionist PR. It's the way grown children often process painful childhoods, by choosing connection where possible. Through birthdays, marriages, and career swings, the siblings stayed in contact with both sides of their heritage, the Nelson showbiz name and the Harmon athletic TV line. Their ability to stand in both worlds is part of why this story still pulls viewers in. It's the collision of two American mythologies, told through kids who survived the blast. And the woman at the center? She lived long enough to put her own last line on the myth. Chapter 13. I spent my whole life fighting the fairy tale. In later interviews and documentaries, Kris reflected on the arc with brutal clarity. She said she spent years trying to be the fairy tale, smiling for cameras, playing ideal wife, ignoring warning lights. When that collapsed, she spent the next stretch trying to tell the truth. Addiction, denial, infidelity, money gone, a family that needed help. She credited Mark for pushing her into rehab when she wouldn't save herself. She admitted she drank too much, used too much, lost control. She admitted she hurt her kids. She did not blame everything on Ricky, even while recounting his own heavy use and disappearances. That balance, owning fault while exposing his, makes her story land harder. Kris eventually sobered up for real. She remarried producer Mark Tinker for a time, painted, and spent later years more quietly in the Southwest. Dogs, art, wide skies. When she died in 2018 at 72, daughter Tracy said her mom's heaven would be her dogs, sushi, and a Santa Fe sky. It's a small, tender image that contrasts sharply with magazine covers screaming about custody wars and crash rumors. Quick favor before we close, and then the takeaways. These long-form Hollywood digs take weeks of combing old court files and buried interviews. If you want more hidden stories like this, hit subscribe and ring the bell. You'll get the next old Hollywood deep dive the moment it drops. Thank you. Moving on. Chapter 14. What her revelations changed. She broke the myth barrier. For a generation raised on Ozzie and Harriet, the Nelsons were the TV template for steady, cheery domestic life. Kris shattered that by admitting the early pregnancy, the substance spiral, and the simple fact that success doesn't protect you from self-destruction. She humanized a teen idol. Fans remembered a gentle crooner frozen at 19. Her accounts of road wear, self-medicating, and anxiety about relevance show Ricky as a working musician under stress, not a postcard. She exposed how image management delays help. When families protect a brand, real intervention stalls. Kris said she waved red flags about drugs and got silence. That silence cost years, and arguably safety. She showed addiction is a family disease. It wasn't his or hers. Both spiraled. Kids bounced to relatives. A brother stepped in. Courts got involved. Anyone who's lived this knows the pattern. Her honesty gave fans permission to see their own households in hers. She modeled imperfect recovery. Rehab didn't end the story. A custody ambush followed. Long-term sobriety came with scar tissue. That's reality. She gave her kids context. Whatever pain the children carried, they also inherited a record of what really happened, not just staged photos. Adults need that to make sense of childhood. Kris gave it. Chapter 15. Ending reflection. The house behind the sitcom. Picture two images, Ricky and Kris, fresh-faced newlyweds smiling for a magazine spread in 1963. And, years later, a courtroom where her brother argues she's too unstable to raise her son. Same people, same marriage. Two realities. The cameras captured one, Kris's later revelations exposed the other. The Nelson story stays irresistible because it holds both versions at once. The idealized 1950s home we wanted to believe in, and the messy, human, sometimes heartbreaking truth that real families live through. Kris Harmon Nelson forced those two images to collide. That collision hurt. It also freed the next generation from pretending perfection ever existed. So, the next time you see a vintage clip of Ricky grinning under studio lights, remember what his wife asked the world to hear. Behind the music, behind the merch, behind the myth, there was a young couple in over their heads, loving hard, fighting harder, and trying not to drown in the era that made them famous. That is what Ricky Nelson's wife revealed. And once you know it, the reruns never look the same. More buried old Hollywood scandals every week. Subscribe so you don't miss the next reveal.